Hi there! Thank you so much for watching. I'm Jacquelyn Fletcher, and this is Healing Words, a show that explores how writing and creative expression can help you with your emotional, physical, and spiritual health. On today's episode, I'll be having a conversation with Dr. Johanna Rian, the director of the Mayo Clinic, Dolores Lavins Center for Humanities and Medicine. Dr. Rian develops and implements programs in humanities and arts for patients, staff, students, and visitors to Mayo Clinic. I've worked personally with Dr. Rian as one of the founding faculty members of the creative writing at the Bedside Program for the past 7 years. And last year, we launched this TV program on the Humanities channel, along with a team of amazing people here at Mayo, including Dr. Paul Scanlon, Rick Andresen, and David Coleman. Now, usually I host this show and interview other people, but today Dr. Rian is turning the tables on me. We're going to have a conversation about a project that I did called Dear You, Messages from Your Heart. I hope it will help illustrate the impact that writing and creative expression can have on your life. So, welcome, Dr. Rian. This is such a treat.
Thank you. It is a treat.
Usually we work together behind the scenes, so now here you are in the hot seat.
That's right. It is hot.
It's under the hot lights. So are you ready to host the show?
I am.
Okay, take it away.
All right. Jackie, you have interviewed a number of people for this show, including writers and doctors and musicians and artists. And I'm wondering how those people have influenced the work that you did on your own book, Dear You.
Well, that is a fabulous question because they impacted hugely. I sit in this seat and interview people who tell me about the research that's being done on creative expression and what it can do to help. I have interviewed writers who talk about how they have used this for themselves. And I am a writer. In the past, I have certainly used writing to help myself through things. But after a heartbreak I suffered a couple of years ago, I said, Jackie, you've got to walk your talk. And so I ended up writing a book to myself. And it was, I would start, Dear You. And then I would write a letter, and it was from my own heart, is how I did it. And wrote the whole thing really just to make myself feel better. It was a private experience. And then, knowing the work that we were doing here, I said, I've got to try something really creative that I would never do before, that I know nothing about, to put myself in a different place in my mind. And so I ended up taking a lot of painting classes and art classes on YouTube. So I ended up painting the entire book. And that just led to this amazing experience that I found rang true with everything I learned here on this set and interviewing people and working with people at the bedside, that allowing yourself to go to this creative space is incredibly empowering.
So you didn't have any experience with visual art before you started this project?
No, other than I went to one painting class when I was in elementary school that I ended up having the flu or something in the middle of it and never went back. So that was the only experience other than, just a few art classes in regular school. But no, I mean, as an adult, I had not done anything like that. And so with these classes, there are so many different kinds that you can experiment with on YouTube, all the different mediums and drawing with charcoals and acrylic painting and all sorts of multi-mediums and collaging. And so I just experimented and gave myself the permission to not be good at something and play. And that, I think, was very healing for me, because it just shut down the part of my brain that was really spiraling around the hurt feelings I had and the anger I had, and that alone was helpful, that quiet space that I could get to. It was very, very meditative in a way.
And did you know before you started to engage in the art that it would have that kind of a healing effect for you? Did you know that?
I had some clue that it could do that because of the reading and research that I had done as we built this show. You know, I had done some reading around art therapy techniques, just so I'm familiar with what those are, so that I can interview someone and kind of sound like I know what I'm talking about. But other than that, no. I mean, and I had read some research on different times where art has been used specifically with different populations to help. So I had read about pottery, and that just the tactile experience of working with pottery really helped people. And I had read about breast cancer patients that had used artwork and how it had helped to reduce stress and the perception of pain that they felt. And I had read about musicians that when we interviewed Dr. Wong on this show, and about how the art of music can help reduce stress, and all of the mediums can help reduce stress and release endorphins in our bodies that make us feel better. So I had read about a lot of that, and didn't know if it would work for me or not. So.
And did it? I mean, you mentioned that you had experienced some heartbreak or some trauma before you started this project. Did it help?
It did, and it helped in ways that I was really surprised by. It's one thing to hear somebody tell you it's going to work. It's another, to experience it. And when I interviewed Rafael Campo on this show, he talked about poetry as a way of, for patients that he works with in Boston, that it was a way for people to claim something and a way to name something. And so that it was that alone felt empowering. And I remembered that in the middle of it all, that he had said that, and that had worked for his patients. And I very much found that to be true for me, that by writing about the feelings I was having, and then claiming that whole experience and claiming the pain that I went through and claiming, that the anger and all those feelings, and then saying, and now I'm going to use that for something good. And for me, that's always the transition moment. It's different for everyone, but for me, that moment when I feel like now I can use it for good for other people, and help other people. And so when I started to paint it and to wait a minute, maybe I could start putting this out in a way that would help other people, that took the pain out of my experience, and this is about me, and turned it into how can I help the world. And that alone was a very healing transformation for me.
And can you say a little bit more about the research that you have done in this area, especially around creative expression and healing? What is the evidence out there?
Yeah, well, a lot of it is there needs to be more research that's been done on this, but there's been a lot, and there was a study that actually just came out that did a review of all of the literature. And so there are studies that have been done around, like I mentioned, there was a hospital in Israel that did this one about pottery. That it's been used with mental illness, with patients with mental illness. It's been used with cancer patients, and where they're actually measuring like the symptoms and the stress levels and anxiety. So we know that it's documented for depression and anxiety. It brings that way, way down in multiple places. And they've done some studies with people suffering from chronic illness, where it's kind of a long-term thing. The other area where it's really been measured is with trauma victims. And so whether it's a sexual abuse, or it's someone who's been through a war zone and been injured, or in those cases, they've looked at how creative expression helps in those cases. And it can really be quite healing, and not necessarily that you're going to turn around and use it to help the world, but there is this kind of what happens with creative expression of writing in different mediums, is that you get to this moment of, I know something deeper about myself. And that is the moment that creative expression can lead to. That is a very healing thing for people in a wide variety of circumstances.
And so is that what happened for you? Would you say that this was a healing experience?
Absolutely, on multiple levels. I mean, one, it was just the stress went way down, because I spent, weekends crying at home, and that stopped. So that was side number one. And then I tend to get really stuck in rumination, where my thoughts just spin and spin and spin and spin, and I can't stop, and I start to turn it on myself. And so all of those things where I was like, oh, I did something, it was my fault, what did I do? And all of that stopped and went away. And it was just this peaceful quiet around, getting my hands dirty with paint. And I stamped the book one letter at a time. And I'm working on 2 more in the series right now, so my hands are probably covered in ink.
Literally dirty.
Literally dirty. And there's something really amazingly calming about that experience. There was for me. And I've heard that from a lot of people, that it's just, it kind of turns off that, left side analytical kind of thinking part of the brain for a little while.
Mm-hmm. And prior to this project, you've been working primarily as a writer. Can you tell us how you see writing functioning as a healing tool in your own life?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been a writer for a very long time, and I guess not the first time. I mean, I've been journaling since second grade, and so I have these little Snoopy journals, from second grade, where I started writing way back then about my parents or getting divorced. So I've been using writing in this way as a healing tool since the very beginning, without knowing that that's what I was doing. I was using it to name my experience, to voice my feelings, and over time, how I've used it is it's almost like a personal coach, where there's this voice that has emerged in my journals that's very much like, you can do it, really positive self-talk, where I'll spill about something and then there's this other voice that rises up. So I use writing that way a lot. And then in my 20s, I had put on a lot of weight, so I was clocking in about 260, 265. And at that point, I tried to lose weight a million times, but never had healed whatever it was driving it from the inside. And so I really used writing to examine what was happening in there and my feelings, and then what did I want for my life, and used it to see a future for myself that I had never seen before. And so I did do that, and used actually some collaging at the time too. I guess, which is kind of that is a visual art, where I would cut pictures out of magazines and put these, vision boards together about what I wanted for myself. And a lot of the things I put on those boards are in my life now. So,
wow.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Now, Dr. Rian, you've done a lot of writing too. Can you talk about the writing that you've done, how that's helped you in your life?
Sure. I certainly haven't done the kind of writing that you have done on a professional level, but I write for myself. I write primarily to remember, so I do a lot of descriptive writing. For instance, when my daughter was born, I spent hours while she was sleeping just describing how she looked in her crib, that kind of thing, so that I could remember 25 years later, as it is now, what it was like. And I also write to discover when I'm having trouble understanding what might be out of balance in my life. I just use my journal as an opportunity to reflect, and I never know what's going to come out of my head onto the page, and often there's a surprise and a discovery and some understanding, which is wonderfully beneficial.
Oh, that's fabulous. So I have a question about that, though, because I'm going to be the host for just a quick second.
You're allowed.
Yay! But so have you ever felt unsafe, having a journal? Because I hear that a lot from people who I've recommended journaling to, and they say, yeah, but I don't want, somebody coming in and reading it. And so have you ever felt unsafe, so have you done something to protect a journal, or would you write it and then get rid of it, or what do you think?
There are some things that I've written that I've gotten rid of that mostly have to do with angry feelings toward another person. Yeah. But that's a very effective way to get those things out and done. You put it on paper, and then you destroy it, and then it's done, and you're free. In terms of my own journal, I don't feel unsafe in any way, although I don't have any intention of sharing that or making it public, but I I journal on my computer. I seldom write longhand. And so it's in a personal file on my computer that no one else has access to, and I don't feel the need to go any further than that in terms of privacy.
Yeah, that's great. I know there's some research that James Pennebaker has done around writing that he says that people do write differently if they think someone else is going to read it.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that's very true.
Yeah, so I think giving the people the permission that if you create something for your own healing, you can burn it, you can get rid of it, you can put it in a locked place, and I have in my will to burn all of my journals without reading them. Just take the trunks and burn them.
Well, and you hear about authors who say this is not to be published until 50 years after my death, when my wife is dead, and nothing can hurt anybody in my life.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, so I mean, I personally think you're very courageous, and so it's not surprising to me that you have never felt. I mean, I don't know. So one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about was this courage that you have. You started in theater, and to me, like getting up on stage and doing all that, and being involved in theater is a very courageous act, much like writing in a journal for some people. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about your beginnings in theater and kind of how that's influenced your work here at Mayo.
Sure. I started my professional life as a theater professor, and I was teaching theater, all aspects of acting and directing and playwriting and theater history and drama theory, etc. But I was also doing a lot of directing. And directing is an interesting process because it's a completely different process than performing on stage. When you are, as a performer, your job is to speak the words that were created by the playwright. But the director gets to be the person who brings together all of the other theater artists, the set designer, the costume designer, the lighting designer, the actors, the playwright, the sound designer, etc., and bring all those people into conversation about how to interpret the play and create a coherent statement that hopefully honors the initial message of the playwright. And the parallels to what I'm doing now, as I see it, are that I have the opportunity to work with people like you. I hire artists to do the Bedside Arts Program, so I hire visual artists, musicians, other authors like yourself who participate in that program. We bring in theater companies and dance companies and musicians who perform concerts for the patients and for the staff. So I, with Dr. Scanlon's assistance, have this incredible opportunity to bring all of these artists, these diverse artists together for the purpose of integrating arts into the healthcare environment. And it's like no other job I've ever had. It's enormously satisfying.
Oh, I bet it is. Well, and you're still directing.
I am, to some extent. Yes.
It's a play that has lots of moving parts.
Yes, that's right.
I think that's really neat.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that one of the things that people who are watching the show right now might be saying is, well, okay, I'm a writer, have been a writer my whole life. You've been in theater, you're directing, you've been a very creative person your whole life. But what if I don't feel creative? I was just on a treadmill the other day with a woman that I went to elementary school with, and she said, that's fine for you, but I'm not creative. And just the word creative, and art made her feel a little uncomfortable. And so I said, well, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's unpack that a little bit, because really all of us are creative. And I told her this story that was actually in A Whole New Mind by Dan Pink. I have a little crush on Dan Pink. But he wrote about a creative director at Hallmark who is this big famous guy who's no longer no longer living. But he told a story of how he would go into a kindergarten classroom, and he spoke all across the country to kids. And he would say, okay, kids, 5 and 6 year olds, how many of you are artists? And every single one of them raised their hands. And then third grades, he would go in and ask the same question. And, a few people would raise their hands, but not as many. And by 6th grade, like maybe one, maybe two, maybe none would raise their hands. So we all start creative. We all start as artists. We all start as storytellers. That's, how we teach each other. And so what about the person who's watching the show saying, I'm not creative?
Exactly, and that's actually something that we encounter a lot within the Bedside Arts program. Our bedside artist often visits with patients who say, "Oh, I'm not an artist. I couldn't do this project," and all it takes is a little bit of time with our artist who shows them what this is about. You pick up the watercolor pen and the watercolor flows out of the pen, or you pick up the Sculpey clay and something evolves. And again, it's a process of discovery that once you engage, you understand that the creative process is about that moment of engagement. And as you say, we all are inherently creative. When my husband picks out his tie in the morning, it's his act of creativity. When you choose paint for the color of your walls in your home or your apartment, you're making a creative choice. So
that's right.
It's just a matter of, instead of being intimidated and seeing it as something that someone else does better than I could ever possibly do, just take the chance and participate and see what happens. I just was creating an interesting art project this morning as I prepare for my grandsons to come for a visit that involves writing with Sharpie pens on a glazed ceramic tile and then dripping alcohol on top of that, so that suddenly this incredible watercolor-like art evolves on this ceramic tile out of nothing.
I love it.
It's very creative and satisfying. Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be perfect.
Right. It's not perfect.
That's one of the things that, this project, the Dear You project, really was so freeing in so many ways, because I didn't have to be perfect. And it really, there's a ton of research too around curiosity and novelty and what that does inside our bodies, and it makes you feel so good, and it helps you problem solve in ways you couldn't before. And so when I was doing this project, I just felt so free, like I was back in the kindergarten classroom. And it didn't have to be perfect. It could be messy, and it could be fun, and it helped kind of return to that feeling of lightness and buoyancy and play, which is just so critical. And I think when you get to adulthood, you kind of forget how to do that sometimes.
Oh, yeah. And so do you have suggestions about other forms of creative expression other than writing and visual arts that people can engage with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are tons, and not just from the art world. So, I mean, certainly there's painting, there's drawing, there's sculpture, there's pottery, but there's also knitting and crocheting and interior decoration and cooking, and, depending on how you come at it. Those are all really creative pursuits. Starting a business, I mean, it really depends. When you're using that kind of part of your brain, when you're really fully engaged, it can come in a lot of forms. So people are already doing a lot of these things. They just don't realize they're, when they make the most perfect cake and they say, oh, what if I add this? And what if I put that in there? And that's a form of creative expression.
As is gardening.
As is gardening, yes, that's a wonderful one.
Yeah.
Thank you for adding that.
Yeah.
So as you know, we offer writing prompts on healing words to people watching because we really believe that it is a healing tool that can be used. And I would love it if you would share a writing prompt with our audience today. What do you think?
I think that'd be great. Okay. I think that given the work that you've done with the book, Dear You, it provides a wonderful example for people who are watching to engage in something similar. And I would ask that viewers might consider writing a letter to themselves from a future perspective. So, for instance, I'm here with you right now, but if I imagine myself a month from now, a year from now, 10 years from now, what might I like to say to myself from that future perspective? And it could be anything as simple as, if I'm a patient in the hospital, I might say to myself, looking back at myself in this moment, thank you for taking the opportunity to take such good care of my body by giving it this care. Or I might say to myself, if I'm in the midst of a traumatic moment, this too shall pass. And so just take a moment and think about what message you might like to receive from yourself in the future.
Love it. Thank you.
Jackie, would you please read something from one of your books for us?
Yes, I will. I would love to.
Great, thank you.
So I'm going to read you a selection from Dear You, Messages from Your Heart. Dear you, you show up, I show up. It's that simple. Love, your heart. Dear you, stop. Do you see that? It's so beautiful. Sorry to interrupt. I didn't want you to miss that. Love, your heart. Dear you, hearts break and get sick and give up every day. Not yours, not today. Love, your heart. Dear you, you're not an idiot for opening your heart again and again. It's what makes you so beautiful. Love, your heart. Dear you, the only way you're going to figure this out is to get some quiet. Find some water and sit by it. Love, your heart. Dear you, I know it feels like you're all alone. Why don't you reach out to someone you love? Love, your heart. Dear you, nobody is coming to save you but me. Irritated, your heart. Dear you, you can trust this. It's real. Love, your heart. Dear you, you say you want to live with an open heart. Then why are you constantly closing my door? Concerned, your heart. Dear you, I vow to give you hope whenever you need it. Love, your heart. Dear you, haven't you learned by now that I'm an asset, not a liability? Irritated, your heart. Dear you, can't this wait until tomorrow? You'll feel better after some sleep, I promise. Love, your heart. Dear you, you're a kind-hearted sweetheart with a heart of gold. I should know. Love, your heart. Dear you, I'll make a memory of this moment so you can take it out and look at it anytime you want. Love, your heart. Dear you, I can take care of myself. You just keep saying yes and let me worry about myself, okay? Go on, say yes. Love, your heart. Dear you, thank you, brave soul, for your willingness to keep showing up. Love, your heart. Dear you, the more you offer me up, the stronger I get. Love, your heart. Dear you, be all of who you are because you're awesome. Love, your heart. Dear you, yes, feel this, feel it all. Love, your heart. And I'll just do one more. Dear you, let go. I got this. Love, your heart. So now that you've heard some of the ways writing and creative expression really can help you, are you game to give it a try? Writing exercises may be beneficial to you whether you're a patient here at Mayo or you're caring for someone staying with us. With the Dear You project, I decided to write letters to myself from myself. I used the phrase Dear You to help me imagine that the me writing the letters was an older, wiser version of me that I called Your Heart. I discovered that the letters gave me a way to express my sadness and anger. I was able to tap into my own positive self-talk that helped me shift my perspective about the pain I felt, and I found myself laughing after writing quite a few of the messages, which is always a good thing. So now I'd like you to try writing your own Dear You letters. The messages can be signed by your heart, an older version of yourself a few years down the road like Dr. Rian suggested, or a wise person you admire. All you have to do to get started is to write down Dear You at the top of your paper. Then write yourself the letter. It could be a paragraph or a sentence like many of mine were. Instead of using Dear You, you could also use your own name. For example, I could have written Dear Jackie. You can write a letter about anything that's on your mind, whether you ask a question, express your feelings, or give yourself comfort. I hope you have a good time with this exercise. And if you want to paint your letters like I did after you get home, why not? And if you want to tell me how this experience works for you, you can visit my website at jacquelynfletcher.com. If you want to explore writing even more during your stay at Mayo Clinic, you can contact the Dolores Lavins Center for Humanities and Medicine at Mayo Clinic to ask to have a writer visit you in your room. Just use the contact information on the screen. We've come to the end of the show today. I'm so grateful for Dr. Rian for joining me and hosting our conversation. I can tell you from personal experience that the good work Dr. Rian and Dr. Scanlon are doing here at the Lavins Center for Humanities and Medicine at Mayo Clinic is helping a lot of people. Why not pick up your pen and give what you heard today a try? Thank you so much for watching. I'm Jackie Fletcher. Until next time, be well.